Daniel was Margaret's entire world. From the very first day he was born, she made herself a promise. She would give him everything she never had. His father. He walked out when Daniel was just 2 years old. So it was Margaret. And only Margaret. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and working in a bakery during the day. Also, her little boy could have food on the table. There were nights she barely ate herself, just to make sure Daniel's stomach was full. There were nights she stayed awake, mending his school uniform under the dim glow of a lamp, whispering silent prayers that one day her sacrifice would pay off. And for a while it seemed like it did. Daniel grew into a bright, ambitious young man. He got into a good college. He landed a decent job. And he seemed grateful. When he bought his first car, he hugged Margaret tight and said, "Mom, I couldn't have done this without you." Her eyes watered that day. Finally, all her pain, all her exhaustion, felt worth it. But then, everything began to change. The moment Daniel got married, Margaret started to feel it. First she thought it was normal. A new wife, a new household. Course he'd need space. So she gave it to him. But slowly, Daniel's tone shifted. Where there had once been love and gratitude, now there was irritation, dismissal, coldness. Started small. Missed phone calls. Excuses about being too busy. Weeks passing without a single visit. And then, the sharper blows. At family dinners, Daniel would laugh at his mother's old-fashioned ways. He'd make little jokes at her expense. And his wife, she would just smirk. Margaret forced a smile through the pain. But each time it cut deeper. And then came the day that changed everything. It was raining. Margaret stood in Daniel's kitchen, holding a plate of food she had cooked. His favorite dish. The same one she used to make when he was a little boy. She thought she was surprising him. Instead, she heard him speaking in the living room. And his words shattered her heart. "She's suffocating me," Daniel said bitterly. "Always acting like this house is hers. She needs to stop meddling. Honestly, sometimes I wish she'd just stay out of the picture." Margaret froze. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst. This house, his house, was only his because of her. She had given her savings, her inheritance, even taken a loan. All to help him buy it. Every brick, every wall was built on her sacrifice. And yet, he dismissed her, as if she were nothing more than an intruder. When Daniel finally saw her standing there, his face hardened. He didn't even apologize. "Mom," he said coldly, "you can't just come here whenever you feel like it. This is my home now. Things are different." Margaret's lips trembled. Her hands shook as she set the plate down. She wanted to scream, to remind him of every single night she had gone hungry for him. But she stayed silent. That night, she lay awake in her small apartment. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like Daniel's mother. She felt like a stranger, an outsider in the very life she had built for him. But through her pain, something else was born. Daniel thought she was weak, too old, too soft, too forgiving. He thought she would keep sacrificing, no matter how cruelly he treated her. He was wrong. Margaret wiped her tears and whispered into the dark, "You may be my son, Daniel, but you have no idea who your mother truly is." And in that moment, her revenge began. Daniel thought pushing his mother aside would silence her. But silence can be sharper than a knife. Margaret didn't confront Daniel right away. Well, she let her silence speak. Days turned into weeks. And Daniel noticed. No calls. No surprise visits. No meals waiting for him. The mother who once held his world together had vanished. First, Daniel felt relief. He told his wife, "Finally, she's not meddling anymore." But slowly, that relief turned into unease. When bills arrived late, when the house repairs went undone, when he realized his finances weren't balancing the way they used to, Daniel started to notice just how much his mother had done in the shadows. Margaret had always been the quiet force, paying off his debts, fixing his accounts, even slipping him money when his salary wasn't enough. And now, without her, his perfect world began to wobble. But Margaret, she was calm. She sat by her window every night, watching the city lights. For the first time in years, she wasn't rushing to save him. She wasn't stitching his broken life back together. She was waiting for Daniel to realize that the life he claimed as his own was nothing without her. But Daniel wouldn't just learn the truth through silence. Margaret was about to reveal something that would shake his world to the core. Daniel always bragged about owning his house, his castle, his achievement. What he didn't know was that it wasn't fully his. Years ago, when Daniel was struggling, Margaret had quietly signed her name on the property papers. Half the house legally belonged to her. Daniel never cared to check. He thought his mother was too old, too naive, too soft. But Margaret had kept every document, every signature, every receipt. And now, she pulled the folder from her drawer. She touched the papers with trembling fingers, not from fear, but from power. "This house," she whispered, "was built on my sacrifice. And one day, he'll learn it." She didn't storm into his home. She didn't scream. No, she made a quiet call. To a lawyer. Within weeks, Daniel received a notice. Half the property was legally his mother's. If she wanted, she could claim her share, sell it, rent it, or move in. Daniel's arrogance crumbled. He stormed into her apartment shouting, "How could you do this to me?" Margaret simply looked at him. Her voice was calm. "How could I? Daniel, how could you?" For the first time in his life, Daniel realized. The mother he thought was weak held the ground beneath his feet. And Margaret wasn't done yet. Because power was only the beginning of her revenge. Daniel tried to smooth things over. He smiled, he apologized, he acted sweet. But Margaret wasn't fooled. She saw the panic in his eyes. The fear of losing the home he bragged about to everyone. So she let him play his little game. All while she played hers. Behind the scenes, Margaret spoke to neighbors, friends, and family. Stories spread about how much she had sacrificed, how Daniel had turned cold, how he mocked the very woman who gave him everything. The family that once admired Daniel began to look at him differently. At gatherings, whispers followed him. The respect he once commanded slipped through his fingers. And Margaret, she smiled quietly in the corner, because this was no longer just about a house. It was about reputation, legacy, and Daniel was losing both. But Margaret had one final card to play. One that would tear Daniel's pride apart. In front of everyone. It was Daniel's birthday. The house was filled with friends, relatives, laughter. Daniel stood tall, boasting about his success, about his home, about the life he had built. Margaret sat quietly, waiting. Her hands rested on a folder. The same folder she had guarded for years. When the room grew silent for his speech, Margaret stood. Her voice was calm, but every word cut deep. "Daniel," she said softly, "this house you speak so proudly of is not yours alone." Gasps filled the room. Daniel froze. Margaret opened the folder, holding up the documents. "Half of this house is mine. Bought with my money, my sweat, my sacrifice. The very sacrifices you laugh at today." The room went silent. Daniel's face turned pale. His wife's smirk vanished. Every guest now knew the truth. The proud man they respected was nothing without his mother. And Margaret. She felt no anger in that moment, only justice. But Daniel's humiliation was only the beginning. The true cost of betrayal was yet to come. After that night, Daniel's image shattered. Friends avoided him. Relatives stopped admiring him. He was no longer the self-made man he claimed to be. He was exposed as a fraud. At work, whispers followed him. At home, his wife's patience thinned. And when bills piled up, there was no mother to quietly save him anymore. Meanwhile, Margaret thrived. She reconnected with old friends, found new confidence, and even started a small business with the savings she had left. Her silence had turned into strength. Daniel came to her one evening, desperate. "Mom, please. I need help." But Margaret only looked at him, her voice steady. "Help, Daniel. I gave you everything, and you threw it back at me. Now you must learn what it means to stand on your own." Tears filled Daniel's eyes. For the first time, he wasn't the powerful son. He was the broken boy who had forgotten the hands that raised him. And in the end, it wasn't anger or revenge that finished Daniel. It was the one thing he never gave his mother: respect. Years passed. Daniel lost much of what he once bragged about. The house, his job, even his marriage. Margaret, however, found peace. She lived simply, surrounded by friends who cherished her. Her story of sacrifice, betrayal, and strength spread quietly through the community. One evening, Daniel visited her. His hair was graying, his shoulders heavy. He sat across from her, his voice trembling. "Mom, see it now. Everything you did. Everything I destroyed. I'm sorry." Margaret's eyes softened. She reached across the table, touching his hand. "I forgave you a long time ago, Daniel. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences." Daniel wept, because in that moment he understood. The greatest revenge wasn't anger. It was living long enough for the truth to catch up. And Margaret, she finally felt free. And make sure if you like my content, then subscribe.